Hello and welcome to this special edition dedicated to the Paris 2024 Olympic Games. The countdown is on. There's exactly 1 year to go now until the French capital will welcome more than 10,000 athletes from over 200 nations for the biggest sporting event in the world. Events for the 32 Olympic sports will take place at sites with some of the most iconic Parisian landmarks as their backdrops. But there will be also some taking place further afield, including in other French cities and even as far as Tahiti. From cleaning up the River Seine to holding the biggest ever opening ceremony, ambitions are high for Paris 2024. With so much innovation comes logistical challenges. We'll be asking the most important question, of course, will Paris be ready on time? Coming up, we'll be having a series of reports for you, and I'll be joined by sports diplomacy expert Simon Roth and French road and track cyclist Clara Coppeny, as well as our very own James Sélina, who's been travelling between sporting venues across the French capital today. But let's start by taking a look back at where it all began when Paris was announced as the winning bid back in 2017.
I have the great honour to announce that the International Olympic Committee has simultaneously elected the host city of the Games of the 33rd Olympiad 2024 and the host city of the Games of the 34th Olympiad 2028. Paris 24, Los Angeles 28.
Well, it seems for me, at least, that the time has really flown by since then. Organisers will, of course, be working very hard to put everything in place. Let's cross now to James Sykes from our sports desk, who is on the River Seine. After a very busy day, he's been moving around all sports venues across the French capital. We'll be talking about your current location, James, later on. But first, there's 1 year to go now. Have you already been getting a sense of excitement on your travels across the French capital?
Oh, Sélina, a sense of excitement. It's a lot to say. I hate to start this show with what's going to be such a special edition of the Olympic Games on a bit of a downer, but it's hard to say that, the city is ready and, the city, there's really that fever going on there. It's not quite there yet. Around Paris, you can see a few logos, there are a few posters around there's a few descriptions of what's going to be going on. But to say there's an actual fever for the Olympics yet, it's not quite that. There's been a lot of talk about the Olympics, obviously with a year to come before that. And the biggest, let's say, step that's been taken has been yesterday. They set up a countdown on the Eiffel Tower that you can now see just behind me. A countdown with, and obviously, a year to go before that. That's been the biggest development so far, because apart from that, there's been a lot of talk, of course, about the Olympics for the good and the more difficult sides about it. And, of course, one of the big issues in France has been the ticket sales. Yes, there were a lot of cheap tickets, but people who won't be able to buy those, well, they ended up having to face either with buying or not buying very, very expensive tickets. And that caused a lot of talk. And a lot of people ended up saying, well, look, I'm not going to pay that kind of amount of money to go and watch the games, and I'd rather just watch it from my sofa on the television at home. So that's been a lot of the talk. There's still a lot of hyping up to do for Paris. And the thing is, Paris, as you mentioned there, has a lot of potential for it because it's going to be taking place all around the city. We're going up through this boat, we're going to see some of the locations and we're going to talk about that throughout the show. But a lot of these locations within Paris are so iconic and beautiful. A lot of tourists go there, but also people who live here spend some time around there in their everyday lives. And they have the potential to really advertise it and really put the message forward that those games are there to come in a year's time. So let's see how things go over the year to come. But for now, there's still quite a bit of work to do on that side.
And on that note, James, obviously there's a year to go now and preparations are still really full underway. The big question is, of course, do you think Paris will be ready on time?
Well, look, we've been going around Paris and around the suburbs since this morning, and from a lot of the sites that we've seen, things do seem to be going pretty well. Now, some of the sites, as we mentioned, are very iconic historical places, so they're actually already built. Places like Versailles, the castle, the Château de Versailles, into the west of Paris, where the equestrian sports, the events will be taking place. Well, that place is ready. There's the castle's there. It's been there for several hundreds of years. It's been the home for several kings. So they're only going to have to make a few installations over there throughout the rest of the year, and that is going to be ready, we're told, by the organisers over there before the end of the year. So that seems all right. We've been to Roland Garros, where the French Open takes place, and where the tennis events will be taking place. There's a new retractable roof being built on one of the courts over there. That's about it, because Roland Garros has been renovated, but then there's still a lot of work to be done more to the north of Paris. The north of Paris, where there's more the suburbs, where the Stade de France is, which is where all those all the international friendlies, international games, whether it's football or rugby, are held, and that's where the athletics will be held, of course. There's quite a lot of work to be done around there. That's where the Olympic Village will be held as well. And the talk, of course, is what's going to be happening for the Parisians themselves and the people who live in the suburbs after the Olympics. As is always the question, we're going to be looking through that very carefully over the next year. Just to give you an example of how things are going, there's a new aquatic centre that's being set up next to the Stade de France, so to the north of Paris, and that's going to be bringing something for the people around there, because the statistic is that around the age of 11 to 12, only about half of the children of that area can actually swim. So the aim is going to be to bring more facilities for them, to encourage them to swim, to encourage them to take up more sports. So that's the aim, and that's going to be obviously the legacy, and what a lot of people here in Paris, and we're going to talk about this later on throughout the show, want to see. Real concrete results for them as well, not just for the weeks when the Olympics and the Paralympics are held.
Indeed, the hope is for a long-lasting legacy for the Games. Thank you, James, for now, and stay on 2 feet there as you're moving across the River Seine. We'll be crossing to you again later on. Now, for a bit of a time for a bit of a history lesson. The ancient Olympic Games originates, of course, from Greece, though the modern-day sporting event, as we know it today, was conceived actually in France. Pierre de Coubertin revived the Olympics back in 1894. They were meant as an occasion for peace, as nations come together and celebrate in amicable sporting events. But the Games quickly got caught up in nations' rivalries and political agendas. The IOC struggled and failed to distance itself from the 20th century's global conflicts. Let's take a look.
Berlin, 1936. Despite numerous calls for a boycott or cancellation, the Games went on in Germany, ultimately serving as a loudspeaker for the Nazi propaganda machine. From the 1950s onward, the IOC had to contend with a world divided into 2 blocks, and the political stance of the committee would remain an ongoing subject of debate.
With the Cold War, it's completely different, because it set itself up as an arbiter between 2 great powers, America and the Soviet Union, the West and the East.
With Moscow hosting in 1980 and Los Angeles in 1984, there were boycotts from both sides.
And geopolitics continues to affect the Games to this day, as we've seen since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine in February last year. The participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes has been a very contentious issue. Today, the president of the International Olympic Committee, Thomas Bach, formally invited 203 countries. Invitations were not extended to Russia and Belarus even. For more on this, I'm joined by Simon Roth, an expert in sports diplomacy at Leeds University. Thank you for joining us here on France 24. Let's start with this latest announcement from the president of the IOC. We've known for a while, of course, that Russia and Belarus will not be having their national teams officially competing, but this does still leave the door open for athletes to compete as neutrals.
Absolutely, and good evening. Thank you for having me. The dilemma that Thomas Bach faces is one that previous chairs of the IOC have faced in bringing those participating, or those nations, athletes from those nations that are participating in conflict, to the world's greatest sporting event. The greatest attention is given to the Olympics and Paralympic Games in the Summer Games, and the difficulties of bringing all of the world's nations together in that one instance are, writ large. The conflict in Ukraine and between Russia and Ukraine has put another lens, another focus on the difficulties, given the importance of Russian athletes and Soviet athletes, as my colleague Patrick mentioned, during the Cold War. They have a long and storied history in Olympic sport in the 20th century. And President Putin, as we saw with the hosting of the Sochi Games, Sochi Winter Games, has an intimate relationship with the Olympic movement. This is something that the current conflict has brought into sharp relief. And the compromises that the IOC will have to make is it sends out its invitations to 203 nations. Bear in mind that the United Nations has only 193 member nations. So the IOC already has more members than the world's premier nation state-based organization. So the sport does something more in that regard than the nation state. And as you see these images of Thomas Bach sharing the certificate and the invitation with all these different countries, it's telling the opportunity that this provides, the showcasing, not just for Paris 24, but for all of those nations. Individually, yes, there's some kudos involved, but particularly it's about what it means to be a nation. There's a question here of how your country is recognized by others. An invitation from the IOC matters to many countries around the world because it's a validation of their nationhood.
And on that note, let's just take a listen quickly to what Thomas Bach said earlier today. He's on a 3-day visit in the French capital to mark that one-year countdown. Let's take a listen to exactly what he said regarding this issue earlier today.
We have at this moment given recommendations to the international federations. And you see at this very moment when we speak here at the Fencing World Championships, neutral individual athletes from Russia and from Ukraine participating. And till the games, there's still 1 year to go, and we have not taken any decision about the participation of individual neutral athletes yet.
So back to you, Simon. Ukraine so far has been pretty adamant in saying that it will be boycotting the Olympics if the athletes from Russia and Belarus will be taking part. And it has gone as far to say that it will not be taking part in qualifying events if Russians are taking part. Do you think that Kyiv will follow through on this stance for the Olympics themselves next year?
Well, President Zelensky has made this a particularly strong part of his campaign against Moscow. Right from the outset of the conflict last February, sport was a key player. The IOC, the Winter Olympic Games had just finished, and the Winter Paralympic Games was on the doorstep before the time of the invasion. So the Paralympic and Olympic movements have been intimately involved in this conflict, whether they like it or not. President Zelensky himself has made sport a rallying cry for his nation. The prominence of international sportsmen and women from Ukraine has been a key part of the platforming of what it means to be Ukraine and its conflict. So I think President Zelensky has a lot invested in making the Olympics a case for being part of the Ukraine liberation opportunity. But equally, it's a difficult challenge for the IOC to make in terms of, are you giving sort of prominence to the Ukraine conflict over others? The world is not a entirely peaceful place other than in Ukraine at the moment. And those conflicts, the opportunity for sort of moral equivalence of, my conflict is closer than your conflict. These are really difficult questions. There hasn't been a time in the 20th century, certainly, let alone the 21st century, when conflict hasn't been part of the international geopolitical scene. And yet the Olympic Games have taken place. And so the idea of the Olympic truce was only resurrected in the 1992 Lillehammer Winter Games as an opportunity to really make a case on behalf of the United Nations and the possibility that peace could reign. And these are the dilemmas of international politics. Diplomacy is hard, and at some point you do have to negotiate with your enemies, whether they're metaphoric enemies on the sports field or in the pool, or at this point between Kiev and Moscow, tangible warfighting enemies. And this is the dilemma that sports diplomacy has to tackle.
A lot still can change in the next year. We'll have to see exactly how that situation pans out. But for now, many Ukrainian athletes have been very adamant in saying that they will be boycotting if there are athletes from Russia and Belarus competing. Many have been very vocal in saying so. Let's quickly just take a listen to one of them.
If they are allowed to take part, we most likely will not go. I personally wouldn't want to go and be there. It's difficult when your friends are dying, fighting, and we will have to greet their men who often have military ranks. Of course, it's your choice whether to greet or not. In general, I believe it wouldn't be right.
And finally, for now, Simon, Russia has announced that it is planning to relaunch its so-called Friendship Games next year, 40 years after its first edition. Could you tell us a bit more about what this event is exactly, and is it being seen as a snub from Moscow of the Olympics?
I think the talk of the Friendship Games is really an opportunity to showcase Russia and its prominence in various sports. The original incarnation was an attempt to somewhat usurp the Olympic movement 40 years ago and make sure that Russia had its platform to display its sporting prowess. Now, the opportunity that President Putin has used repeatedly for sport in promenading athletes through Russia's Moscow May Day parades, in making sure that Russian athletes are well rewarded by the states, not necessarily in financial terms, but in terms of prominence. These are things that President Putin has done, and he's also been very clear in his use of the Olympic timetable schedule. You know, it was no coincidence that the Winter Games had just finished before the invasion of Ukraine, or indeed in 2014 the invasion of Georgia. So the opportunity for Mr. Putin to utilise sport as a vehicle for his own version of Russian nationalism is very much, part of his modus operandi, and I see no particular reason to look at the potential launch of the Friendship Games in any other way than that.
Well, Simon Roth, expert in sports diplomacy at Leeds University, thank you very much for your insights. We'll be joining you hopefully a bit later on in the show. Now, another big issue, of course, is climate change for the Olympics, as big sporting events come under increasing scrutiny among the growing climate crisis. And the Olympics next year says it's aiming to be the greenest games yet. Paris 2024 chief and three-time gold medalist Tony Estanguet says he wants the event in the French capital to be a new model even for staging the Games. My colleague Jean-Émile Jamin spoke to him about climate concerns. Let's take a listen.
And now we are going through one of the biggest climate crises with this latest temperature surge throughout Europe. What precautions can you ensure for athletes participating?
Yeah, of course, the world of sport has to adapt to the climate change, and that's also why Paris 2024 decided to reduce by half the carbon footprint of the Games. It's really important that as the biggest sporting event in the world, we demonstrate that this is feasible to organize and deliver the Games with the same level of ambition, but more sustainable, because we have to contribute. And of course, the temperature is key. We looked also what happened in the past, and especially in Tokyo, where the temperature was very high also, with a very high level of humidity that we don't have here in Paris at this time. So we are very confident that the athletes will be in very good conditions next year.
And you can watch a full interview there with Tony Estanguet on our website, france24.com. Now, another issue we've already spoken about is the legacy left by the Olympics, and it's one of the big questions for any host city. How structures built for the Games will then be used after to the benefit of local residents. Paris has invested in sports venues, housing and public transport, with the aim, of course, that they will give back to the city in the years to come. Let's go back 30 years now to 1992, when Barcelona hosted the Olympic Games. Antonia Kerrigan takes a look at how hosting the Olympics transformed the Spanish city.
These 4 kilometres of waterfront sporting facilities are quintessential to the Barcelona tourists and residents know and love. But before the 1992 Olympics came to the Catalan capital, this coastline had an entirely different identity.
Where those blocks of flats are now, there was a row of factories. Metals, chemicals, cars. It was as though the city was turning its back on the sea. It's a noticeable change, no? It's a beautiful area now.
The 1992 Games now belong to the city's heritage. Even the under-30s talk with nostalgia of their city abuzz and of the mania around Michael Jordan's basketball dream team. But what's also kept the Games alive is the municipal sporting legacy. The diving pool is now a public swimming pool and bar. The Olympic Stadium isn't home to any one club, but regularly hosts sporting events and is among the city's premier concert venues. But it's not just the wealth of sporting infrastructure from 1992 that has made Barcelona one of the world's sportiest cities.
What changed in the city was how they promoted sports in general. Not just the new facilities, all sports.
Could it be the same for Paris? It's hard to imagine such a transformation. But this Barcelona organisational alumnus believes in Project Paris 2024.
Building the Olympic Village in Saint-Denis won't have been easy, but it will allow for the regeneration of the town and to better integrate it into Greater Paris.
The 1992 Olympics were a catalyst for urban regeneration, and hosts ever since have promised the same. But Barcelona remains unparalleled, others going over budget or building facilities for the occasion, only to abandon them later.
Now we're talking of infrastructure, millions of fans, thousands of athletes and hundreds of delegations and tens of competition sites. With the exception of the Olympic Village, France has chosen to work primarily with existing infrastructure for the 25 competition sites. But it's countdown time now, and organisers have not a moment to lose as they put in those final preparations for all those Olympic sites and transport. Let's take a look at how they're getting on.
North of Paris, in the Saint-Denis suburb, the Olympic Village is almost ready for the 25,000 athletes it was built to host.
There's only one crane left now, which means we've finished the foundations up to the roof and the walls. Now we're onto the interiors. That's plumbing, electricity and painting.
The size of 70 football pitches, it's France's biggest building site, and it's set to be ready on time, despite a few hiccups.
We found a bomb dating back to the Second World War, so we had to stop work for a few hours. We also had COVID and supply chain difficulties with the outbreak of war in Ukraine. But otherwise it's going well, and we're still on the schedule set back in 2017.
After the Games, the village will be converted into 2,800 heatwave-proof homes in a neighbourhood with 9,000 trees, shops, 2 schools and a creche. Another promise of the Games was to make all venues 100% accessible on public transport. And with 50 competitions per day across 25 different sites, Île-de-France Mobility is calling for backup.
We will have 60,000 people per hour at some peaks. That's 1,000 people per minute. Even a minor glitch with that number of people would be disastrous. So we're going to have extra drivers and reinforcements in the stations. We'll be hiring around 5,000 additional people.
Paris is also expanding its public transport network.
Line 14 will be extended to Orly Airport by June 2024, so spectators will be able to travel into town by automatic metro. It's a real luxury for fans.
And cleaned up for the Paris 2024 open water swimming event, French swimmers tested the waters of the River Seine earlier this month. Rehearsals for the boat parade came off without a hitch, unfortunately so, as the opening ceremony is now only a year away.
So the time very nearly now is 8:24 here in Paris, or 2024. The exact time the opening ceremony will be kicking off in the French capital this time next year. And for the first time in history, it will not be taking place in a stadium. On that note, let's cross back to James Versina, whose location will give us a bit more of an insight into exactly what we can expect from that opening ceremony. James, you are, of course, on the River Seine, where more than 100 boats will be travelling nearly 6 kilometres along that iconic river in what organisers are calling the most accessible opening ceremony in history. What more can you tell us?
Well, it's exactly going to be that, Sélina, in exactly a year's time then. This very boat that we are on right now is going to be part of that ceremony, part of the over 100 boats that will be taking part in the opening ceremony. One that's for the first ever time is going to be outside of a stadium. Now that poses many challenges, which we'll get to, but starting with what the actual plan is, well, they're going to leave from the east of Paris, the Quai d'Austerlitz, towards which we are heading. We're actually turning around right now because we're on what is actually a normal cruise for tourists. Just in front of me, there's several hundreds of people just admiring the sights throughout the city. So we're going to go back towards and follow the route that the ceremony will be taking, and going past every one of these spots. Now, on the boats is going to be the usual dancing and everything that you would see within within what would normally be a stadium. But on top of that, obviously, well, there's going to be all the security side and all the technical sides, everything that's going to be broadcast, and everything is going to have to be tied down to absolute perfection. There's already been some rehearsals. There was one rehearsal on the 17th of July with about half of the amount of boats that will be taking part in that rehearsal. But there's still plenty of time for them to do plenty more. But we're going to go through every site throughout, and what's going to be crazy is that we're going to see at this moment where these competitions are taking place. So take, for example, we're going to be heading towards the Place de la Concorde. Place de la Concorde, there's going to be the skateboarding event on there. Skateboarding, which is only going to make its second ever appearance in the Olympics, which is such almost in a way an anti-Olympic sport. Up until now, you would never have imagined this taking place in there. Well, it's going to be now taking place on the Place de la Concorde, which is the absolute the pinnacle of everything that's all about the luxurious Paris. Skateboarding is going to be taking place on there. After that, towards the Eiffel Tower, you're going to have the beach volley there, and so on throughout the along the River Seine. So we're going to see all of that in the opening ceremony, but everything has to be taken into every small detail. I mean, in just a few minutes, we're going to be speaking to the heads of the company that owns these boats, who's been telling us a little bit about their preparations in just a few minutes' time.
It's truly going to be a spectacular sight, a lot of excitement ahead of that opening ceremony among Parisians here in the French capital. But of course, there are also concerns over security for such a large-scale event. What more can you tell us about what the French authorities are trying to do to ensure people's security?
Well, naturally there is, because, look, normally a ceremony takes place in a closed stadium. You can filter pretty much who's going into a closed stadium. You can't do that in the same way when a ceremony goes all along the River Seine. 6 kilometers they're going to have to block off, and spectators will be able to come and watch along the side of the river, come and watch the ceremony at that point. So they're talking about 80,000 members of security staff, whether it's for the ceremony but also throughout the games, needed to ensure that everything goes all right, because it's going to be a truly open air, as we said, Olympics throughout Paris. So lots of challenges on that way. Obviously, that is among the main concerns, because it's going to be broadcast all across the world. And security, well, we're going to ask the head, as I said, of the company about a few little details about how he is affected by that and what they have to do. But as we can imagine, there's quite a lot of it that's kept in quite a secretive way for the moment.
Yeah, a few things that still yet to be revealed about the opening ceremony. And finally, James, I have to ask you, you are obviously on the River Seine, about the big clean-up project to make the river swimmable. Triathlon and marathon swimming are scheduled to take place in its waters. More than €1 billion has been invested in that clean-up operation. I know there's some very sceptical Parisians about that, myself included. Just how clean will that water be?
There is. We talk about organising everything that we can see, but then there's everything underwater. If events like the triathlon are going to be taking place in the Seine, well, the water needs to be crystal clean. It's not the case right now. I said this earlier on. We went to have a look, and as you know, the River Seine does not really make you want to go and jump in there and go for a little swim for now. It's one of the biggest challenges for Paris. They say that things are going well also on that side. They've compared the quality of the water at this time of year compared to what it's going to be like during the Olympics, saying that it is looking decent. But that's going to be a massive challenge. We've talked about cleaning the Seine for years. I can remember when I was young, the mayor of Paris and then president of France, Jacques Chirac, said that he'd clean up the Seine and that he would cross it, swim across the Seine. Well, that never happened. Whether that happens this time round, I think the Mayor of Paris is going to have to do it if she wants to prove that the River Seine is clean enough for everyone to swim in. But athletes are going to be the first ones to really test that out when they take part in the events on the river. But of course, there's more than that. Just as we mentioned it earlier on the show, there's more about just the legacy of the Olympics, because it's what is that actually going to bring for Parisians further down the line. Well, Paris has promised that Parisians will be able to swim in the Seine as of 2025. So that's the summer after the Olympics. That's a big promise. They've already planned out 3 zones in the centre of the city, because you can currently swim in one section towards the north along one of the canals, but not in the centre of the city. They've made plans for that. That's one of the promises. Let's hope they keep it.
I'm not sure I'll be taking a dip in it anytime soon, personally, but maybe I'll have to give it a go. We can see how things pan out in 2025, can't we? James, still on his feet after a few boat manoeuvres there. We'll be crossing back to you later on. Let's move on now. We've obviously spoken a lot about the organisation for these games, but what are the sporting aspirations for France's Olympics team? Expectations, of course, always high for a host nation. French President Emmanuel Macron has set the bar very high indeed. The aim is for France to finish in the top 5 in the medal table. Their neighbours, Team GB across the Channel, did it for London 2012. France finished in 8th place back in 2021. Who are then the best medal hopes this time round? Let's take a look.
Bronze, silver and gold. France is looking for a treasure haul in 2024. Among the French stars to look out for, Kevin Mayer in the decathlon, Florent Manodou in swimming, handball's Nicolas Karabatic, and judo's Teddy Riner. One of the high-profile French sportswomen is Clarisse Agbegianou in judo. She already has 2 Olympic golds.
I've got a lot of training sessions to do. My daughter requires a lot of energy and attention. For now, I'm concentrating on the basics. I know the games are coming up fast. Once 2024 comes around, it's going to be like a rocket taking off. I'm taking the time to breathe now.
Judo could bring in the most medals for France. It's hoped there'll be better success in this games compared to games past in the pool, with attention focusing on the new French star, 21-year-old Léon Marchand.
My first thought is that I have time to train hard and get ready. I'll be of an age of my peak performance, more or less. I'm going to make the most of it, manage the pressure properly, and see it as a competition like any other.
Other stars that the French hope will make an appearance at the Paris Games include Kylian Mbappé in football, Antoine Dupont in rugby, and Victor Wembanyama in basketball. It's estimated that France could amass 107 medals next summer.
And I'll be joined a bit later on by one medal hope for France, that is Clara Coppeny. But for now, we're crossing back to James Vecina on the River Seine. James, we're going to talk more about the bateau mouche that you're on. It's become an institution in the French capital. And as you mentioned earlier, it will be playing a very important role in that opening ceremony. Over to you.
Well, Sélina, as promised, I'm joined by the head of the company, of the bateau mouche, Tawfiq El Amhani, who's here with me. We're going to talk a little bit about, we've talked about what the bateau mouche are going to be doing throughout the ceremony. Can you give us a little bit more information in what way your company is going to be involved on the opening day?
Our company will be central in this event because it is the oldest company on the Seine, and of course it has this responsibility to represent the whole country when it comes to the ceremony of Olympic Games.
You were part of those of the rehearsals on the 17th of July. Trying out to see what the ceremony was going to be like. You told me that there were about 50 boats in the rehearsal. How did things go?
Very well, very well. We tested all the choreography, if we can say. We tested also all the security matters and this kind of things. And everything went very well. We learned a lot. to be ready.
What did you learn? What did you learn specifically from that day?
We learned how to manage going with 40 boats, one after the other, but millimetric evolution, motion. This is very important because it doesn't happen every day on the scene. It's going to be very, very special.
You told me earlier on that you practiced in case there were some boats that broke down or something like that in the ceremony. That's important as well?
Of course, it's very important because it can happen. It's things that can happen that day. So we make training on that.
And what does it mean for the Bateau Mouche, as you mentioned? It's a historic company in Paris. There's a lot of tourists know, of course, because they come and visit the Paris through the Seine. What did it mean for you when you were approached by the Olympic Committee, by the organisers, to be taking part in the opening ceremony?
It means two things mainly. One is the honor to participate to this kind of event. The second is a big, huge responsibility because on that day we have to be on the maximum of our possibilities. So it is very important that we meet with the event on the 26th of July next year at exactly this time.
Can you tell us a little bit, because of course security is a massive concern for everyone. Is Paris going to be, is it realistic? I mean, they've made the promise that they're going to do the ceremony this way. Does it seem okay security-wise for you?
I cannot speak about the security in general in Paris. This is not my job.
In the opening ceremony, though?
Yeah, we are going to do everything to make our site very secure. All the other sites which are the high quays will be secured by the authorities, by the police, by the authorities. We are going to secure our own site. We have people who are training now to be ready for the D-Day to secure all our visitors.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much for that. There you have it. That's what it's going to be like then in exactly a year's time. We hope that everything goes precisely as planned and everything on this very boat goes well at that opening ceremony.
Definitely lots of excitement, James, ahead of that opening ceremony. Lots to be looking forward to. Moving on, we just saw earlier some of the medal hopes for France next year, and I'm now have the pleasure being joined by one of them, Clara Copani, a road and track cyclist currently riding for FDJ Suez. Thank you so much, Clara, for joining us here this evening. We started the show looking at when Paris won the bid to host these games back in 2017. If my maths is correct, you were 18 back then. Did you ever imagine that you'd be potentially competing at the games on home turf?
My head was already in Tokyo, so I was hoping to do for Paris, and it was already in my head the day they said it was in Paris.
And obviously, with this being games on home turf, it's a lot more excitement, but it's also a lot more pressure. How do you feel about competing next year?
I feel confident for the moment. I think, yes, it will be a lot of pressure, but I hope positive pressure, and with all the country all for here for us. And I'm looking forward to compete. I hope to compete this.
Well, exactly. On that note, because obviously you haven't technically qualified yet for the Olympics, there's obviously a lot of preparation that goes into that beforehand. You've decided, for instance, not to compete in this year's Tour de France and instead focus more on the Glasgow World Championship. Can you tell us a bit more about that preparation with a year to go and how you get to Paris next year?
Yeah, I have a lot of race on the road, but also a lot of race in the beginning of the year on the track. And it's we have choice to do in good shape for in a good moment. And I think 1 year before the Olympics, it was important to be on the track and to prepare this World Championship like I will prepare Tokyo next year.
And just looking at what you've been doing over the past year, it seems like a very, very busy year. You've obviously got your commitments with your team, FDJ, as well as the French team to make sure that you get the points to qualify for the Olympics next year. How do you juggle it all?
It's not easy every day. It's a lot of training, a lot of pressure, because you have to be in good shape during the road race, but also on the track, it's a lot of travel also. So, it's it's like I have a lot of motivation. I want to compete on the road, to be able to win also, and same on the track. So it's a lot of training, a lot of
Very hard work indeed. Let's talk about the two disciplines you competed back in Tokyo 2021, the Madison and the Omnium. Could you quickly explain for our viewers who maybe aren't big cycling experts exactly what those disciplines are?
For the Madison, we are two. There is 13 kilometers. Each 10 days we have a sprint, and it's the one with the most point who win the race. And for the Omnium, it's classification with 4 races, and it's the scratch, the tempo, elimination, and the point race.
Okay.
And, the one with a lot of points win also the race.
And obviously, you're only 24, but this is actually going to be your second Olympics. Hopefully next year. You competed back in 2021 at Tokyo. You came 5th in the Madison, and you said you were quite disappointed at the time with the result. You were the vice champion in the discipline in the World Championships. As an athlete, how do you pick yourself up from disappointment and use it as motivation for the next time?
Today, I can't say it's a disappointment. At the moment, when I was in Tokyo, of course, I was there for the win. But also, I was young with my teammate. We were young. She was also 20 years old. So it was a disappointment because you expect a lot of yourself, and it didn't go well because 5th in the Olympics at 21 years old. I think everyone can imagine that, want this place. But today, it's like, okay, I was in the best shape of my life at this moment. Only 5th, only. And maybe next year it will be my time. 25 years old, it's my time.
I think you're still in your prime, certainly, for me at least. So I have to ask, obviously, for next year, what is the goal for you in Paris?
To be honest, to win gold medal. I think 3. If everything went good for me in the team pursuit, Omnium and Madison, and I want 3 gold medal. It's my dream.
Got to dream big, especially when it's on home turf. Clara will be coming back to you later on. Let's go now to the breakdance. So let's have a look at this breakdance. This is one of the new sports that will be making its debut at the Olympics, and there's also high hopes for the French team for some medal hopes. Let's take a look at that. Our team caught up with some of those hoping to compete for France next year in a breakdance, also known as breaking.
A dance floor, a DJ to provide the music, and 2 dancers to battle it out in front of a panel of judges. Those are the basics of breaking. In Paris, there'll be a men's tournament with 16 b-boys and a women's with 16 b-girls. After each battle, a winner is chosen and the loser eliminated.
It's like boxing or any other combat sport. We're face to face, we have to ask a question and the other person answers.
Omar Ramishi coaches the French breaking team. For this sport, born on the streets, being part of the Olympic Games is a huge opportunity.
The exposure and introducing break in a sporting context is great recognition. Being in the Games today is recognition of 40, 50 years of existence.
Breakers must be able to dance to a wide range of musical styles, from funk to hip-hop, with 2 essential criteria: adaptability and improvisation.
When you go to dance, when you get up on stage, you don't know what music is going to play or the DJ, so it's partly improv. It's really intuitive. You have to adapt to the moment. It's really about being creative.
We really work on sets, little modules that you have to repeat, so that you feel it in your body and you can express them at any moment with any music on any dance floor.
Among other things, the judges mark on technique, personality and originality of movement. Each breaker has to stand out with a personal style. That's why 15-year-old B-girl Sissy was recently crowned champion of France.
We have to find our identity so that we know who's dancing. As for me, my parents are African dancers, so I add a little bit of African dance. It's my personal touch.
The USA, Japan, and more recently China are among the top breaking nations. But B-boy Le Gaët, one of the most experienced members of the French team, is clear about his ambitions.
The gold medal at the Games in Paris in 2024.
Each country can field up to 2 breakers in the men's and women's categories at the Olympic Games. But to do so, the B-boys and B-girls will have to earn their place in the various qualifying events that will take place up to June 2024.
So as we see there, Clara, obviously so much preparation goes in ahead of these games. You often just think that athletes almost turn up and compete in their event, but there's a lot of build-up before that. We spoke about the Glasgow World Championships. Can you tell me just exactly how you're preparing? Do you feel ready? And how important that event is for qualifying next year?
Yeah, we are actually in a training camp in Saint-Quentin-en-Yvelines, so in the velodrome for the Olympic also. And yeah, it's a lot of preparation. We were 3 weeks also in altitude camp in Tignes on the road, but it's for the track preparation. And yeah, it's very important because we are 1 year before the Olympics, and it's also maybe the ticket for Paris in this race. So it's very important. We are ready, I think. Today we had a lot of tests in team pursuit, and it went well. So yeah, I'm ready, and I can't wait to compete in Glasgow also.
That's very good to hear. Just a quick last question. Obviously, you've had 4 years now to kind of prepare and to mentally prepare yourself. Do you think now that there's just a year to go, do you see maybe a switch for you and maybe your teammates who will be competing last year from maybe excitement to more determination? It's the last year to go before the games.
Yeah, we have a lot of preparation, mental preparation also, and year after year we can see it's always better, and yeah, we are ready.
And how do you personally feel, obviously, about it being in France? Does that give you extra drive to be competing in a home games? How does it make you feel, the fact that you have this? Not every athlete can say that they have competed at a home games.
Yeah, but last year we had the World Championship also in France, so we know that what atmosphere we can have for the race. So yeah, it's amazing.
Well, lots to be looking forward to, and you'll obviously have a big home crowd supporting you in all your events. Thank you so much, Clara Compagnie, for being with us this evening. And well, we've already spoken about how we'll be seeing some of Paris's most iconic sites on display during the Games. Events will be taking place across France and even further afield. Tahiti, the largest island in French Polynesia in the South Pacific, has been chosen for surfing events, famous for its reef break and huge waves. It's also it's really quite the spot, as Leo McGuinn explains.
It's perhaps the most stunning sight of the 2024 Olympic Games. Far from Paris, on the island of Tahiti, lies Teahupo'o, situated in between a mountain and a lagoon. This discreet village has become famous for its huge waves. And with 1 year to go before the Games, the boats are all there for one thing: surfing. A group of American tourists have made the trip for that very reason.
It's like one of the best waves in the world. That's why I come down here from Hawaii.
And the reef being so close, all of it, it's a completely different vibe. It's like some of the craziest waves happen here. I mean, obviously Pipeline too, back home in Hawaii, but this place is something else. It's completely different.
All are basically professional athletes.
Go, Mikey!
Because Teahupo'o is as fascinating as it is dangerous. Brutal and fast, the waves can reach a height of 15 meters. Several surfers have lost their lives here, and boating accidents are not uncommon. Even this boat captain, who's lived here for over 30 years, is sometimes surprised by the ferocity of the waves.
In the time we were talking, I drifted for 20 or 30 seconds. Suddenly you're being hit by a second wave, which is unforgiving. It's very dangerous.
In Tiahupo, Olympic officials will be staying with local residents next summer.
How many people I can host depends on if they are a couple or individuals. If it's individual, 2 people, 1 in the bedroom, 1 on the couch. If it's a couple, 2 in the bedroom and 1 on the couch, so 3 overall.
The help is vital, as the village isn't cut out for such an event. There are no hotels, no Olympic village. Athletes will have to sleep on a cruise ship.
This will bring us tourists in the years to come, but when it comes to 2024, we're not necessarily expecting thousands of tourists.
Constrained by the small size of the site, organisers will be banking on its fan zones, scattered across the island of Tahiti, to create a fervent following.
And that nearly brings us to the end of this special edition for 1 year to go ahead of the Olympics. We'll just quickly cross back to James Vecina on that péniche there, the bateau mouche moving across the Seine. James, just one last takeaway from you, just with this 1 year to go ahead of the Olympics. What would you say your main takeaway from today has been?
Well, I think the main takeaway we can round up with the kind of idea that we came off with from the start is that I think perhaps this might be the beginning of where that fever's going to start, and where this real feeling that we're going to be getting the Olympics happening on home turf here is on such a big scale. We're just about to go past the Eiffel Tower, which is where the countdown will begin, and as mentioned, there's going to be plenty of events being taking place all around there. But these are events that France needs to do well in, because yes, it's one good thing to be hosting the Olympics here, but you also want to finish up with a good result. That was the case when you look at Japan when they hosted it in Tokyo, when you look at London and they did that over in 2012. Well, France needs to look for that top 3 spots if they can, and obviously that's not just in terms of number of medals, it's the number of gold medals that really counts in the end. We've talked about how for the first time there's going to actually be an equal divide between men and women athletes. That's been, if we look at things, seems to be serving France pretty well, because there's been a lot of, in the last editions, medals won on the women's side, notably around fencing, which will be taking place on the other side of the Seine here in the Grand Palais, and as well in judo as well. So these are things that are helping France, definitely. Let's hope that they can pull that off, because yes, it's great to be holding such a huge, glamorous event, and we're looking forward to seeing how things go. But in the end, they do also need the results if they want to back that up, and everything that comes into France to try and create that spark along many, just to bring more enthusiasm around so many sports. When we look at the state of French tennis today, for example, it's not the same as it has been, and that's something that needs to evolve a lot. We went to Roland Garros earlier on. That's going to be a place of incredible, it's going to be an incredible spectacle going on over there, but it's, let's face it, going to be more to be with other nations. Of course, when we think of the likes of, perhaps it might be where Rafael Nadal wraps up his career, but that would be taking place in France. But we need to see the French athletes also. Well, France needs to, as they'll be hosting the events, needs to get those medals. So that's going to be a lot of work. It's a lot of work before that has to be done over the years before that. Let's see how it delivers for them. Let's see if they get a little bit of the luck, a bit of that extra stamina coming from the home turf.
Always is that extra bit of incentive, isn't there, when you're hosting the games? It's just gone out of your frame there, James, but you were just by the Eiffel Tower. There's a bit of mystery still about whether the Eiffel Tower will or not be taking the Olympic flame after the opening ceremony. Do we have any more on that, or is that tiny little little surprise that we'll be waiting for next year?
Well, I think as you mentioned, the flame, that's one of the things that is also going to bring that incentive to France, because it's going to be going throughout pretty much the whole country. There are a few areas, a few départements, which is kind of sub-regions where it's not going to be taking place, not going to be going through. But that's going to definitely bring around that motivation, and people are going to see what's actually going to be going on in their country. There's going to be events, as mentioned, outside of Paris as well. As to whether the flame is going to make it to the Eiffel Tower, what's going to happen on the actual day, what I've been told, there's a number of surprises that we're not going to find out until just then. So stay tuned, we'll find out on the day, but it's definitely going to be exciting if we're going to find out some more things as weren't planned and aren't expected. Let's see what Paris has in store for us at that point.
Yeah, there's so much still to look forward to, isn't there, James? That's all we have time for now. Thank you to my guest this evening, James Sélina, that you've just seen there on the River Seine, Clara Coppeni for the French team next year, and Simon Roth, who was with us earlier on. Thank you for watching, and of course we will be having lots more coverage throughout the year to come, so do keep an eye out. Goodbye for now.